morning, everyone. Do you hear me? Yes. I hope you had a good coffee break. And welcome to this Provocation and Response Plenary 1 on the many dimensions of the complexity with Svetlana Mintcheva, Independent Strategy Consultant, LASTESIS Collective, represented here today by Daffne Valdés-Vargas, Åsa Simma, actor, director, dramaturg, and CEO of the Sami Theatre here in Sweden, Dr. Ahmad Naser Sarmast, founder and director of the Afghanistan National Institute of Music, and last but certainly not the least, filmmaker and UNESCO Goodwill Ambassador for Artistic Freedom and Creativity, Deeyah, who was not able to join us in person today, but who has sent us a message on why art and dialogue are important. So let's just take a moment to listen to Ms. Khan, and then we'll begin our conversation. Could we have Ms. Khan's video, please?
Artistic expression is about... Artistic expression is about our imagination. It's about what it means to be a human being. It's about asking questions. It's about challenging the problems that we see in our societies. It's about speaking truth to power. It's about creating beauty in times of darkness. It's about igniting hope in times of division and hopelessness. It has tremendous, tremendous power for social change. And all of these reasons are often the reasons why those who seek to limit or remove artistic freedom at all are so afraid of it. The reality is that certain forms of art can and does challenge prevailing norms and beliefs and values in societies. And I think that's where the disagreements deepen in terms of, should we allow this freedom? Are we comfortable with this freedom? In principle, on paper, we are. But once it manifests itself in society, can we actually stomach it? And many find that they cannot. And another way to look at this, or that I've been thinking a lot about recently, is adding to the complexity of this is also, who gets to create art? Who has the means to do it? Who has the ability to reach audiences, to have the resources to be able to create what they want to create, to be able to have access to spaces that are often occupied by people who have certain privileges and who have certain status and standing in society? I think that developing a common understanding requires a continuous dialogue between stakeholders, including artists, policymakers, educators, civil society, to ensure that the rights of artists to freely express themselves is respected, protected, and promoted. So I think the complexities are vast and profound, but I think what we cannot lose sight of is why art matters, why artistic expression matters, why artistic freedom is so crucial to protect and think about and talk about and continuously have a dialogue about, which is what I know that you will be doing now. Thank you.
As we all know, everywhere around us, threats to artistic freedom are continuing to rise at an alarming rate. So what we thought we would do this morning is to ask the questions, whose freedoms of artistic expression and the right to participate in cultural life are being threatened, by whom, how, and why? And what indeed are the various complex ways through which voices are being silenced across the world in today's fragile and uncertain times? For one, how do we navigate artistic freedoms when sometimes we are still debating who is an artist? That is still sometimes a very contested idea. And to talk to the complexities of working at the intersection of art, activism, and feminism, we do not have to look further than LASTESIS. As you all probably know, this feminist and artist collective from Chile was formed in 2017, and they are very well known for their path-breaking street intervention, The Rapist in Your Path, which was replicated in about 200 cities across the world, and everywhere it held state institutions accountable. So we'd like to begin this conversation by asking Daphne about the concerns, complexities, as well as the comforts in the journey that your collective has had in the recent years, being very much visible and in the public eye. LASTESIS was named one of the 100 most influential people by Time magazine in 2020. Daphne, tell us about your journey. Please use your headsets. Daphne will speak in Spanish. Daphne, the floor is yours.
Good morning to all. I will talk a little bit about the artistic freedom from the perspective of our artistic collective, interdisciplinary and activist. We think of ourselves as a network and a collective. It is very rigid, and we want to break the foundation of the patriarchal society. In 2018, we decided to found a collective, LASTESIS, to spread feminist theories, to be able to reach more people with these ideas as much as possible, and also so that they would reach the press and to many politicians who are still talking about laws regarding our bodies with the Bible in their hand. We decided to go forward in this path to move forward in the feminist activism. In 2019, we were working about within the subject the issue of sexual violence with performance. At the same time, the capitalist foundations, neoliberal patriarchal foundations of the society started breaking, and all that sent all this phenomenon sent all the population in Chile to the streets, and all the walls became screams. The protest became a performance, and protests songs were a call to action, and the neighborhoods became assemblies. The government declares war to the people, and people go out. Some are armed with weapons and others with stones. The bodies, the rights and the freedoms of the women and all the LGBTQ collectives are exploited, and together with illegal exploitation, that caused us to denounce the violence in politics and socially. So we wrote the lyrics of a song with a simple choreography. We used our bodies, and we invited all the people who wanted to participate, and we realized we performed a rapist in your way, and we had a festive environment. We performed that. We dedicated that to the police in Chile, and it was denouncing the rapists and those who violate the sexual rights. And almost immediately, people wrote to us and asked us to replicate that performance in their area. So we sent them the lyrics, the music, and we requested that they would send the videos back. That was the only thing we were requested from them, and we got videos from many places in Chile, Mapuche collectives, young women, old women from many places, New York, Mexico City, Buenos Aires, Istanbul, many other places. Without having the intention we had become very quickly in a network, and our very small network had become very wide, and what had extended to more than 50 countries, and it had connected people who lived a few kilometers far away from us, speaking other languages, living in other cultures, and we connected everybody through the performance and through this cause, and we together acted with this feminist force. We used this network, the digital platform, which allowed us to overcome the limitations, special limitations, and that helped us so that they could recognize our faces, our pains, and they let us see the curves in our bodies and the thoughts of each group, and it helped us to become a body and to heal the open wound caused by centuries of patriarchal domination. The presence in media, in the digital media, which presented feminist demands through the performance, put us in the middle of the public digital space. And many people who had power and were questioning us, they saw the power of the visibility in the internet, which threaten the ability to silence us. We have got attacks constantly, threats to death threats, to rape us, censorship, and then there were 2 legal actions taken against us by the police in Chile for inciting to violence, and that gave us the means to respond to this. All the people through internet got together, and they helped us to get legal help and some international support to face these attacks, and that helped us to defend ourselves against those who persecuted us and continue doing our work. And we are combining the local and the macro-social, the international, and we continue working with protest and as activists in the world, continuing a path which is parallel to the institutionalized agendas. In our case, we are working with self-agency and an activism which claims the right of the bodies for the bodies, and we defend and we challenge the commercial logic and the institutional policies of the colonial government. We think that the network as a way to work, as an aesthetic mechanism and a feminist practice, and we also think that as a methodology and as a practice that can be used to combine the art and activism, because among other things, it saves lives. We think about the collective to break hierarchies, and using different strategies in different fronts, we are trying to change the world.
Ahora vamos a ver un video que intenta en solo un minuto ilustrar lo que acabo de decir. Es la performance Un violador en tu camino, hecha por nosotras, pero también réplicas de otras personas en distintos países y también otras performances que hemos hecho en el espacio público. Así que si pueden poner el video, Colectivo Las Tesis, por favor.
Now we're going to watch a video, and also in other places.
El patriarcado es un juez que nos juzga por nacer, y nuestro castigo es la violencia que no ves.
Daphne, thank you so much for sharing that. You spoke about being out there in the public digital space. Are you able to hear me, Daphne? So you were speaking about, you were in the public eye, visible. Everyone in the world was watching what you were doing. And you were also in the public digital space that you spoke about. I wanted to ask you, on one hand, I'm sure you must have received a lot of support and solidarity. And on the other hand, you spoke about the threats. Could you tell us which were the support or the alliances that most surprised you? Were they from outside the cultural sector? Were they from unexpected allies? And what for you, going through this entire journey, was the most complex part of your artistic freedom being violated?
Actually, I believe that I was hearing myself. I believe that all the support that we have received from everybody, all of them were surprising to us. Even today, we received support from just anybody in society and also from international communities, which helped us, and also from our attorneys. And there are attorneys who work with human rights, but they belong to feminist networks. So somehow that network that I mentioned right now, this feminist network that got activated, so to say, through this performance, but also it gets into action very fast. For example, for us, when we needed to receive legal support and become more visible and show what we're going through, obviously we were not the only people, the only artists who were in that situation. If you consider the whole political and social complex phase that we're going through. So yes, every single individual and organization is always a very gratifying surprise. And what was your next question?
Mainly about the alliances that surprised you, and then on the other hand, during this entire phase, what was the most complex part of the violations to your artistic freedom? What surprised you the most? What shocked you the most? What were you not expecting, but you felt that this is the most difficult part of the journey?
Well, I think the hardest part of this journey is to be so constantly exposed, and also a lot of people hide behind digitalization, and somehow the digital space is under their control, that they hide behind, and they express things and they act in a way that in actuality would not happen in real life, so to say. So this is kind of allows them to be hidden. And for you to deal with that on an everyday basis is very complex because we have no kind of background or preparation or psychological support or any other kind of support other than this network that I mentioned, that people who work with a legal aspect and making ourselves visible, but on a personal and emotional level as a collective. It's very complex to deal with this on an everyday basis with our work when we're going through all that, because we start feeling fear and self-censorship, and it's very complex.
Daphne, for sharing that. A second issue that we had wanted to put on the table today was distinctions between arts and culture. And by extension, distinctions perhaps between artistic freedoms and cultural freedoms. For First Nations people, the distinctions between arts and culture are perhaps not as separate or as binary as in certain other, perhaps Western cultures. And by extension, as I was saying, artistic freedoms and cultural freedoms are often interwoven. And this is true in many parts of the world, and very much so for First Nations cultures and peoples. And today, Åsa Simma will talk to some of these issues. She grew up in a reindeer herding family, a nomadic family traversing between Norway and Sweden, and learned traditional Sami singing, which was forbidden at that time, though I learned it's one of the oldest forms of music in Europe. And also will speak to her own lived experience, but her experience is also the experience of her people, the Sami people and indigenous people who are living in the transnational Sápmi area. And today, their culture, language, traditions are well protected. But what we'd like to hear from you, Åsa, is tell us about the long road towards achieving these legal protections now, and what are the new challenges you are facing with regard to the cultural expressions of the Sami people? Åsa.
Well, first of all, I want to pay respect to this land that we are on. We are in the city of Stockholm. There's a lot of Sami people residing in this city, and I want to pay respect for their struggle for their rights and for their children to be able to practice the language. My people, we have been sharing this country with this so-called Sweden for many, many hundred years. And my territory is about 80% of the land that is called Sweden. It's a huge area of land. And I want to remind you all that we never gave away our land. We didn't sell it, nor did we borrow it. So I claim my country as my people's country. Thank you very much. Kiitos oppajan. Yes, you mentioned that my name is Åsa Simma. Yes, it's right. It's in all my Swedish papers. It's correct. But I have another name. This is my name. We give our children song names. This is how eternity and the invisibles will know you, not by the Swedish passport and my written Swedish name. This is my guarantee to connection with the invisible. And I carry it deep in the heart. I have 2 sons. I've given them their song names. And as you heard before, I'm coming from the Arctic. I'm many, many thousands of kilometers north of the Arctic Circle. And I was brought up in a reindeer herding family, traveling between Norway and Sweden, moving with the reindeers. And we are the only indigenous people in Europe, within the European Federation. And we are divided into 4 countries: Norway, Sweden, Finland, and northeastern Russia. And it's a huge area of land. And we have 9 different languages in between us. In Sweden, 5 official Sami languages. So as a Sami theatre, I'm expected to have all these 5 different languages in the repertoire. And I know of no Swedish theatre that has to use more than 1 language. So this is a huge task, and it's a difficult one to be able to feed this huge area and these many languages on Sami language. I speak 1 language, I understand another. That's it. There are my limitations. My territory has been colonized by 4 states for many hundreds of years. years, at least 500 of years. And I remember back in the 90s when I went to Estonia, when Estonia had just become free, and I went to the Swedish church actually in Tallinn, and then the person, the guide, the church guide was saying to me, back then when we were colonized by the Soviet, back then when Soviet colonized us, and I was thinking, oh my God, maybe in a few hundred years I'm going to be able to say the same thing. Those days when Sweden colonized us. Might happen, we don't know. The world is changing very quickly. I grew up within my tribe. 99% of the Sami people are fluent in the language. And I always thought that my language was a majority language. And when I grew up, I heard from the Swedish state that my language is a minority language. And it was really difficult for me to understand how come this area where I come from, where everybody speaks the language, now we're called a minority. There must be something wrong with the mathematics, I think. My name song that I just sang, our singing has been banned for a long time. And when I was growing up in the 70s, my mother and my grandfather, they really encouraged me to learn the Sami traditional singing. And at the same time, I observed my grandfather taken to holding cells for 24 hours when he was singing traditional songs in public. And I didn't understand why my people were teaching me something that was considered criminal. That was back in those days. Now it isn't that way. I was taken on a tour when I was 9 years old with a young Sami cultural activist to tour the Sami communities to encourage our singing, an act of resistance, but for my nation, an act to safeguard our creativity. And we managed to remove the ban. Today, our singing is widely respected around the world and a way for many Sami artists to survive. So what is Sami art, you might wonder? I've been thinking this too, what could it be? And I want to recite a Sami artist who said that art as an isolated phenomena is an unaccustomed idea for the Sami. As a result, artists are a professional group. They are also a product of modern society, a result of mad rush of our time. Through the Sami lifestyle, each moment in life becomes an artistic experience. Carving with a knife, colorful clothes with a belt, a cap and a scarf, white moccasins on the snow. Isn't it a dance? Even if the steps may be unsteady from time to time, isn't that so beautiful that people can just sit down by the fire and talk to each other? That is art. The same man that I quoted, an important Sami artist who really worked for the acknowledgement of Sami art and culture. He later became my mentor and kept hammering in my mind, it is so far away that which is near. He encouraged me to work outside the borders of the nations that had colonized us, Sweden, Norway, and Finland. In that way, gaining acknowledgement and respect. In that way, revitalizing our artistic practices. He did that, the same thing with the Sami singing, and went outside these countries and returned to these countries, and finally our traditional singing was reborn. My mentor, my Sami mentor, he even won an award called Prix Italia, usually awarded to classical orchestras. But in his creation, the birds were the solists. He discovered for 40 years ago that the same species of birds had changed their way of twittering their songs. Something had happened in nature. A big change was approaching, he said. so far away, which is near. For a couple of years ago, while trying to safeguard my theater's existence, and I would say we succeeded, but we didn't succeed to get funding for us to survive in a decent way. But suddenly, we were doing a co-work with the National Theatre of Belgium, and they offered us to come and live there in exile in Belgium, and said, well, if Sweden doesn't help you, come here, and we'll negotiate from here, from Brussels. I haven't taken that step yet, but it might be necessary if things do not change in this country for the Sami culture. We have to remember that an act of resistance might be an act to safeguard our creativity. I want to quote another Sami artist in viewing our way of how we see as ourselves as part of time and existence. Everything we do it for the coming generations, so that they will have the opportunity to live in Sápmi as Sami. Our art and culture has an origin 1,000 years from now into the future. So what I decide now is going to have an effect in 1,000 years. That's how we see us being part of history. And as you all know, the climate crisis has become an ongoing topic, and it scarily reminds us of the growing need for reconciliation with nature, with creation, a knowledge that indigenous people care for deeply. In early age, we teach our children to ask for permission from the land, the earth, when we need to cut down a tree, when we need to build a house, when we need to take water. And the examples are many, but we ask for permission from the land, because land is me and I am the land. We are in unison. And that is why I feel very strongly that our artistic freedom has to be safeguarded. We have to be given the resources to express our ways. And if we look back talking about the climate changes, our people, we discovered it already back in the 80s when we were up in the high mountains. We saw the change in the nature. And indigenous people across the world started to negotiate with the United Nations, for instance, and no response. And then comes Greta for a few years ago, and everybody is listening to exactly the same thing our youth said for a long time ago. And what was the difference? Why were we not heard? Because we are not so interested for the media and for the mainstream. But we do have a message. And also to mention the forced Christianization and Swedish colonialism led to the oppression of Sami spirituality, language, and culture. The Church of Sweden played a significant role in establishing a running boarding school, nomad school, which enforced the separation of young children from their parents and a loss of language, identity, and culture. The church also played a crucial role in opening doors for the racial biologists, resulting in a severe violation of human dignity. Church officials allowed Sami remains to be collected for purposes of racial biology, sometimes in brutal and dehumanizing circumstances. Complicit in colonization, the church legitimatized exploitation and loss of land and assisted in separating Sami from Sami. The division of the Sami into different categories came to shape the legislation that the lapse must be lapse policy, resulting in painful conflict between the Sami that remains to this day. And this colonialization, that the lapse must be lapse, is still vivid in this country's mind. We see that our cultural associations and institutions who are struggling for survival We are not given means for long-term existence and development, and a lab has to be a lab. Just give them a little bit to survive, but absolutely not to develop. That is what a good lab is. Am I running out of time? A little bit. So the Sami cultural expression have to be safeguarded, but the state has other preferences. 1999 to 2020, the cultural budget in this country increased by 240%. 1999 to 2020, the Sami parliament's budget for Sami culture increased by 24%. And Sweden has signed a bunch of legislation safeguarding the Sami people, but obviously a signature is only a signature. We have cultural rights. We are in the Swedish constitution. And as an indigenous person, I like to address a simple action to the state. You gotta walk your walk. Thank you.
Thank you very much also for sharing the journey, your journey and the journey of the Sami people. May I ask you, have there been recently any conversations with those on the other side, be it the Swedish state, the church, or the scientific community? Have there been conversations to address the issues that you have raised? Has there been any progress? Please tell us something about that.
Yeah, just a couple of weeks ago, we had a meeting with the state secretary of the culture department, and we've been working 6 years to get the decent funding so that we can work on a long term. And we don't get a yes, and we don't get a no either. It seems like somebody has locked the door and swallowed the key. And we don't know who the person was that swallowed the key.
And you're talking about funding for the Sami Theatre?
Yeah, and it's not only Sami Theatre, it's Sami culture is under-financed. You know, we have created a network to support each other, and I think that this country would be much more poor without our input in the cultural expressions.
And have there been, outside of support for cultural institutions to support Sami culture, have there been bigger conversations such as through Truth and Reconciliation committees? Are there those conversations happening?
Yeah,
as well?
they are happening. Actually, they just started the process. They are just called the Truth Commission, not the Reconciliation, which I think is much more interesting than the Truth. So, but it's simultaneously happening in Finland and Norway, a Truth and Reconciliation, but here it's only a Truth Commission.
Thank you very much for sharing that. From what we heard from Åsa, I think it reaffirms that participation in cultural life is an essential cultural right in the context of artistic freedoms. And I would now like to invite Dr. Ahmad Naser Sarmast to talk to us about this right to participate in cultural life and the larger question of our cultural rights in the context of his country, Afghanistan. As you all probably know, Dr. Sarmast has been at the forefront of protecting human rights and the cultural and musical rights of the Afghan people. And please tell us about the remarkable story of the National Institute of Music that you founded, and also about the unfolding tragedy at the moment where an entire country seems to have lost its voice, lost its music, and has gone silent. Dr. Sarmast.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me today at this wonderful event. Before I speak any word about the Afghanistan National Institute of Music, I would like to take this opportunity to raise awareness about what's happening today in Afghanistan when it comes to the cultural, musical, and artistic rights of the Afghan people. I wish we had the luxury to speak about censorship in Afghanistan today. I wish censorship and freedom of expression was the only issue in Afghanistan, and we could tackle it together with the rest of the international community. But today, when I'm speaking here, I would like to bring to your attention that Afghanistan is the only country in the world that its entire nation is silenced. Silenced musically, artistically, and culturally. Today, Afghanistan is the only place in the world that its entire nation is deprived of their cultural and artistic rights. I'm speaking here on behalf of the Afghan musicians, and I will be focusing on one particular aspect of art in my country, while I can also raise awareness and concern about other activities of the Taliban group when it comes to arts and culture. Just a few weeks ago, or maybe a couple of months ago, the Taliban once again began the destruction of the artistic monuments in Afghanistan, which have been created in post-Taliban Afghanistan. During the peace talks between the United States and the Taliban, there were a lot of changes, a lot of speculation that the Taliban are changed. That the Taliban of 2021 is different than the Taliban of 1996. But for us, living in Afghanistan, it was always clear that Taliban are not capable of changes. We've been witnessing in Afghanistan back on a daily basis what was happening in the districts, villages, and countryside which was coming under the control of the Taliban. And therefore, we knew if the Taliban will be back in power, once again, we will be witnessing a cultural genocide in Afghanistan. Forget about the censorship and freedom of expression, a cultural genocide. And today, when I'm speaking here in front of you, a musical genocide is taking place in Afghanistan. Afghanistan is the only silenced nation. I'm not using the word silent nation, I'm using the word silenced nation. It's been forcibly silenced. Afghanistan is the only country today in the world whose children are deprived the happiness to learn a musical instrument, to touch a musical instrument. We are not able to give a smile to a child by giving them a musical instrument that we've been doing back in the last 14 years. Today in Afghanistan, the people of Afghanistan are deprived their rights to listen to music, to play music, to practice music, to take part in music making. And Afghan musicians are deprived their rights to make a living through music and to have in their disposal all the resources to share their arts, their music with the rest of the community. These are the realities of Afghanistan when it comes to the field of arts and culture. But there's another saddening reality in Afghanistan, is the women of Afghanistan, the women's rights in Afghanistan. Afghanistan is the only place in the world today that half of its population has been erased from society. They have been denied rights to work, rights to make a living, rights to education, rights to appear in society together with their families. In spite of all the speculation and the whitewashing of the Taliban, today we are witnessing the Taliban did not change. In the last 22 months since the return of the Taliban, there was a lot of talks about engaging with the Taliban. And the West has been actively engaging with the Taliban. In some countries, for the Taliban were thrown red carpets. What was the result of those engagements? Did the Taliban change? Did the Taliban respect the cultural rights, artistic rights, and human rights of the Afghan people? The more compromises was made for the Taliban, the more Taliban became harder and began implementing more draconian policies against arts and culture and freedom of expression in Afghanistan. If I'm going to come back to the Afghanistan National Institute of Music and the story of the Afghanistan National Institute of Music, I just use in the background a slideshow. An institution which once has been called the happiest place in Afghanistan, a beacon of hope for Afghanistan. Today, this institution is a center for the military groups of one of the notorious terror group of the world, Haqqani network. Instead of the laughing of a child and the sound of music today in this happiest place of Afghanistan, in the beacon of hope of the Afghanistan, you can only hear the sound of the heels of the Taliban. And that music institution is out of touch of the Afghan people. I believe my time is over, but I'm happy to speak and answer to your question as it comes up. But it's important that today, from this wonderful gathering where experts in the field of freedom, advocacy groups are together, and I hope by the end of this conference, we can have still a united voice, a united statement in solidarity for the restoration of cultural, artistic, and musical rights of the Afghan people. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sarmast. The very powerful personal accounts that you have heard here today really illustrate the old and evolving complexities of safeguarding artistic freedom. The threats, sometimes old, sometimes new, are influenced by dominant narratives and dominant political and social systems that, as we all know, typically favor those in power. Sometimes governments, sometimes religious authorities, law and order, and all of which we have heard about here today. But we'd also like to tackle a little bit the less discussed powers that be. And to do that, I'd like to turn to Svetlana Mintcheva, academic and activist, and she was formerly heading the Arts and Culture Program at the New York-based nonprofit, the National Coalition Against Censorship. Svetlana, we hear a lot about state pressures and also from religious authorities. But today I'd really like you to turn the spotlight on those that we sometimes perhaps don't talk about, others that we don't see as threats, both outside the cultural sector and perhaps also within it. Svetlana.
Thank you, Anupama. And it's an honor to be here with all of you. There's so much expertise and so much thinking about the issues in this room. And sometimes it's humbling when working on freedom of expression in the United States to hear what people are going through elsewhere. But I think there are developments now, and we're living in a very fast-changing world. And there are developments kind of in the liberal, increasingly illiberal West that are global and that are changing information streams. They're changing how art is circulated. And I'm very interested, of course, there's the production of art, but there's the circulation and distribution, access to art, as Deeyah mentioned, that is really key. And it's key not only to individual artists, it's key to the public sphere as a whole. And there are three things that are changing very fast today that I'd like to kind of open up as a provocation. And these are technology, cultural platforms, and political polarization. So new technology, one can talk a lot about the pluses and the negatives, the surveillance, about the digital device. But technology has brought a radical change in the distribution of art and information in general. You have a decentralized circulation of information, including artistic expression, which makes it increasingly difficult to absolutely suppress something. We have that's a sea change in time. There's a show on video art at MoMA in New York I saw last week. And video art in the 60s, 70s, and 80s was there to a large extent to subvert a dominant narrative. There was a dominant narrative, and there were pirate stations, there were different ways of show alternative truths to subvert those dominant narratives. And censorship was a big problem, and counteracting censorship. What happens now is we have exploding streams of information. We have all the information out there. There is no, there are some dominant narratives, but they're challenged from all sides. So you have, rather than a kind of a scarcity, a fight of narratives, you have too much. So while suppression becomes more difficult, drowning out of information is easy and very likely. And in a cacophony of voices, how do you draw attention to your work? So as a result, we have a growth in importance of cultural platforms or cultural gatekeepers. These are the platforms that give prominence and legitimacy to certain information, to certain art. These are museums, galleries, educational institutions, the gatekeepers of culture. And there's a lot of pressure on those platforms, and it's coming from all sides of an increasingly polarized political spectrum. Art becomes a focal point for political polarization, and as a result, there's a lot of self-censorship and fear in institutions. So, kind of more in detail, technology. Technology has become a very important tool in circumventing censorship. For instance, in China, they're using NFTs, if you know, non-fungible tokens, are known as this way to put art on the blockchain and sell it for many millions, so it's a big investment vehicle. On the other hand, it's been used by Chinese artists as a way to put information on the blockchain or videos about protests, and that it could not be suppressed. So you put information, it's put on a distributed network of computers, and no single entity could suppress that information. So technology has become important for the circulation of work. It's also important in giving opportunities to access restricted content through virtual private networks, through encryption and anonymization. So there are a lot of opportunities there. And we have a participatory, democratized, and decentralized information. But at the same time, that leads to a kind of disintegration of the public sphere, to the creation of multiple echo chambers. So you don't have a centralized truth, for better or worse. And the question of visibility remains. So who can see the work? What work can have high visibility? And that is decided by the platforms that give prominence and legitimacy to content. So who should command a platform? How do we make platforms more inclusive? Should certain established artists be denied a platform because of personal positions, and that was the Me Too movement, or because their work can be seen as offensive? There's a lot of pressure on platforms coming from all sides of the political spectrum, and they have become especially sensitive to peer pressures, to pressures in the West coming from the left. There is a discourse of trauma and about psychic violence that art is being put in the crosshairs of. So should certain art that somebody claims is offensive and is violent be removed from one of those platforms, a museum? And so this is coming from the left. However, in the US, and I think in a lot of European illiberalizing democracies, you have a wave of very aggressive conservative politics, a kind of backlash to liberal developments in the last 20 years. We have a conservative legal turn on the state level, and attacks on LGBTQ books in schools, attacks on books about race in schools in the US, laws against drag performances, laws against diversity and inclusion initiatives. There are US abortion laws that now ban even any discussion of abortion. So it's really a very, for the last maybe 2-3 years, a very, very aggressive conservative wave. Political polarization is very often played on the cultural stage, where art becomes a kind of convenient symbolic target, and institutions are under a lot of pressure. So they very often choose to self-censor. And kind of funnily enough, I asked ChatGPT about how it could help with censorship, how AI will help with censorship. And one of the suggestions that I was given is that AI could identify potentially problematic content before it is published. It can scan an image or video for explicit content or hate speech and flag it for the artist's review. And this could help artists avoid having their work removed or censored after it is published. So AI would be very helpful in self-censorship. It will also provide feedback on potentially insensitive or offensive elements of work. You can imagine that deployed at scale. So what we have here are, with tech tools and platforms, there are challenges and there are opportunities. And these are things that we could be working on. Giving tech tools to artists and closing the digital divide. Strengthening the autonomy of platforms, recognizing their key role in the public sphere at the same time as they work to transform themselves and open to different and competing narratives. And then also developing alternative platforms like the way Daphne was talking. These are tasks that we have in front of us, but are also amazing opportunities to open up. Thank you.
Thank you, Svetlana. In the context of all these many myriad challenges that you have outlined, are there people we should be talking to, with whom we should be having important, continuous, but difficult conversations, but which the cultural sector is not having or not yet having?
Well, there are many levels of people and institutions that we should be having conversation with. And I think it's very important. In my work, I talk to institutions a lot. And sometimes an institution is censoring, and then you take a confrontational position. But it's good to realize that there are pressures and that we need to support and collaborate with institutions and make them stronger rather than create a confrontational position. But there are, obviously we talk about government mechanisms a lot, and that is important, but also civil society, tech platforms. Tech platforms are, we have an initiative to have tech platforms put artists in content moderation decisions in a more active manner. So these private entities are determining our infosphere. They're not necessarily opposed to artistic freedom, but sometimes kind of by default by the fact that they're interested in engagement more than freedom of speech, they censor. But there are many, like tech platforms, publishers, museums, also strengthening alternative platforms. So there are many levels that we should be talking on.
Thank you, Svetlana. At this point, I would really like to open the floor to hear questions, comments from any of you. We have another 20 minutes at least for a conversation, and floor is open. If you would like to not share your name or other details, because as you know, this is being live streamed, that's perfectly fine. You can just give us your comment or raise your question to any particular panelist or to the panel in general. So the floor is open, and I think we have colleagues who will bring the microphone to you if you can tell us who's interested to break the silence. and get us started. Okay.
I'm asking one question regarding, I have come from India and I live in Uttarakhand. In Uttarakhand, we have two regions. One is Kumaon, another is Garhwal. We have local languages, but those languages are not included in our government's. We are trying to approach our government, but we are failed. How we can get those languages to include in the Indian languages of the. This is my question.
Thank you for your question. I think we'll take a few comments, questions, and then get talking with our panelists. Yes, please.
Olgito, thank you. My question is very broad, but goes to all panelists. In your diverse work, do you see that there might be potential in dissolving institutions from national borders? So what Åsa was talking about in exile, bringing her institution in exile. Is that perhaps something we will need to explore more in the future, that instead of being geographically located to one specific space or place, do we need to move beyond these borders of both time and place? Thank you.
Åsa Simma, thank you so much for a powerful statement. I wonder if you could share with us your wish list beyond an increased budget. What would you like to see to make Sami art and culture flourish in Sápmi?
My name is Anusur Rahman. I am a Bengali Swedish citizen and work for Swedish Study Promotion Association and Center for Literature. I also sit in the board of the Swedish Writers Union. My specific reflection to Åsa Simma, once I had a conversation with Dagens Nyheter's formerly chief editor, Orani Ruth, and he asked me, since you have a double identity, could you please, in a sentence, reflect on your double identity, marking the prospect and problem in Sweden and Bangladesh? And I made it in one sentence. So Bangladesh has a lake of institutions, and Sweden has a block of institutions. My question to Simma, would you like to comment on this, or do you agree, or if you have any other reflection? Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Chris Torch is my name. I remember from the earlier conversation this morning the word fragmentation. And I concern myself with, although we have a great admiration and respect for the multiplicity of cultural expression that happens in the world, at the same time, in an increasingly globalized world, fusion, intercultural experience may be also the most important. That is not just defending the fragments, but interweaving us in some way. So the development of intercultural competence, and I think that probably is created or developed partially by mobility. So I would like any one of you who would like to comment on this, going about the importance of mobility, of experiencing other places, whether as students, as young people, or even as adults later on, and how we can find ways of fusing our cultural experiences. The things that Åsa explained about the Sami people, my same experience in Africa, finding where culture has a whole nother reason for being, or it has another kind of power than in our institutionalized Western cultures. And there's a lot of co-learning that has to go on. So I would like just some comment around the difference between respect for minorities and interculturalism, which is finding a synthesis of some kind. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe we'll take one last question here and then turn to our panelists.
Yes, hello. My name is Annika Floren. I work for the European Commission in Brussels. As you know, the EU, one of the founding principles and values is human rights, democracy, freedom of expression. And we've heard today many of you speaking about the role of civil society when it comes to artistic freedom. So I was just wondering, what role do you see for regional organizations like the EU, and how can we contribute? Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll turn to our speakers. Maybe Åsa, you would like to perhaps first respond to the Sami, your wish list for Sami culture to thrive.
Yes.
And then
I will first of all answer my Sami sister, because I see you are there. And I say that this with the removing the borders, you know, that I would say we Samis are experts on that. I mean, I've been growing up part-time in Norway, part-time in Sweden. I worked in Norway within culture. I worked in Finland in Sami culture, and now I'm stuck here in Sweden. So I think that if you need any expertise how to work over the borders, talk to the Sami people, because we know how to, if the roads are closed, we know how to get over the mountains to get to the other country and the other city. We know our land. We don't need a map. We know every mountain. We know how to go there. So in that sense, I think it's an inherited experience within the Sami people to work over the borders. And now, like the borders that exist now, Norway, Sweden, Finland, Russia, we didn't create them. We have other borders. We have the language borders, where my language changes to another language. That's my border. And it usually goes from west to east. It doesn't go Sweden, Norway, Finland. It's another. And then nowadays, when we are so multi-language, we speak so many languages, the Samis. I mean, gee whiz, for a South Sami to go to Finland and work with Sami people, what do? They speak English. And I can speak North Sami in Norway, Sweden, and Finland, but there's always another language we can use where we are co-working, and we do co-work. And here I ask for a lot of acceptance within the Nordic unions that we have within culture to help us for our freedom to create and safeguarding our culture. The Nordic countries who have been working together for a long, long time, and just like we have, the Sami people. So there I think that absolutely I'm not stuck in Sweden. My theater is touring all the other countries as long as the language is allowing the productions to go. Thank you.
We had a question about also languages that are not yet mainstreamed, how to seek recognition for them. So I was just wondering, Åsa, Dr. Sarmast, or any of the panelists, would you like to talk to good practices? Yeah. Or
it was the Mr. from India, yes. Yeah, this with the many languages, it's a challenge, but a challenge can be very inspiring, actually, because you got to break the rules and you got to invent something new, you know, to be able to include all the other languages. And as an example, I have two examples from my company. We created something. It's a youth program for young people. We call it Language Circus, where we are teaching circus tradition, like difficult acrobatic things for the kids. But the only thing they are not allowed to do is to speak Swedish. They can speak all the other languages in the world, but not the majority language, that is existing in the area where we are touring. And by working physically, you know, doing stuff for your body, and then at the same time learning the language, counting 1, 2, 3, I'm juggling, 1, 2, 3, I'm juggling, you know, something happens in the body of the little human being, and suddenly the language breaks out. So I am a spokesperson for physical activity and language learning, not sitting with a book and, you know, I was taught Sami by living the Sami language, by walking, by climbing, by getting water. That's how I was taught the language. And one thing that we recently have done, we have also a storytelling program that is traveling. We have been managing to do the production both in Sami and also in Sweden to include the Swedish audience, the children. And then after that, we then make it to a radio theater together with the Swedish Broadcasting. And now the same product is being done to an animated film. So we recycle the same product 3 times just to make sure that the language is reaching out to the ones that need to hear it, that want to hear it.
Thank you. Would you like to respond to the issue of languages, or?
I would make a few statements on the number of questions, what is institutions in exiles. I think in cases like in Afghanistan, the only way forward and to make sure that institutions who've been in forefront of freedom of expression and ensuring artistic and cultural rights of the people and the children in countries, exiling and taking the institution in exile is the only way forward. And that's why when the Taliban reached the gates of Kabul, I began working with a team of international community and international network to rescue and give another opportunity to the students of the Afghanistan National Institute of Music to chase their dreams and to have hope outside of Afghanistan. And that's why I evacuated 273 people, students, faculty, and their families out of Afghanistan. And currently, we are in the process of reestablishing the Afghanistan National Institute of Music in Portugal. But we are very lucky to have the full support of the government of Portugal. But still, existing legislations, bureaucracy, there are issues and challenges that sometimes might undermine all our efforts. But taking institution in exile is probably one of the options for rescuing and giving opportunity for the people to hope and dream and to do what they've been doing in their own countries. So that's what we did to rescue the Afghanistan National Institute of Music. About the role of the United Nations and European Union, this international institution have a significant role in ensuring and amplifying the voices of the repressed people. For example, in the case of Afghanistan, continuously there are reports about the violation of human rights in Afghanistan. But I would like the European Union Commission and other institutions that to make it clear and emphasize on their reports about the violations of cultural and artistic rights of the people. The musical denial, the denial of the musical rights of the Afghan people. When we are talking about the Taliban, about human rights, they should clearly understand that artistic rights, musical rights, cultural rights, they are part of basic human rights and human values. And they should be on all negotiation on the table with the Taliban and pro-Taliban organizations.
Dr. Sarmast, I wanted to also pick up on the question we had from Chris Torch here about, because now your institute is based in Portugal. How has the interaction, musical interaction, or the broader cultural interaction between the community in Portugal, musicians perhaps, but also the wider cultural community and your students and your institute?
Back in Afghanistan, we've been very much committed to promotion of musical and cultural diversity in Afghanistan, while at the same time we've been committed to the preservation and revival of Afghan music. But we never promoted Afghan music on the expenses of musical diversity. We've been always bringing Western musical elements within the Afghan music, and also using the achievements of the Western music and music education for safeguarding Afghan musical culture and Afghan musical tradition. And that's why in many ensembles and orchestras that we established in Afghanistan, including the Afghan National Symphony Orchestra, we add always Afghan instruments in the makeup of those orchestras. And we've been in the forefront of people-to-people and cultural diplomacy in the last 20 years. But in each tour that we undertook outside Afghanistan, we've been always inviting local musicians to join our ensemble and our orchestras to play music together. That was one of the ways that we've been promoting intercultural dialogue, people-to-people diplomacy, and also promoting fusion and dialogue between cultures, and in my case, a dialogue between musical cultures and musical languages.
The question of institutions, whether working at the regional level, whether institutions hinder or help, and what is the fine balance between too many institutions and too few, have been coming up. So I was wondering whether Daphne, Svetlana, in your context, or in a broader philosophical sense, any of you would like to speak to the issue of institutions?
Well, in a way, you know, the art world is very borderless. There are art fairs every day and art biennales across the world. So you have this internationalization, but it's the same people all over, and it's borderless. So there's this kind of tension between the loss of borders and, you know, their cross-institutional work. But there's also work on the local level that local politics, to me, is becoming more important today because of a kind of erosion of trust and truth in things that are more remote. They say that, there have been surveys in the US that people trust local news and they don't trust non-local news because you can verify. So, and local political activism is more active, and more there's more apathy on the national level. So you have to work on both. And yes, there is an international arts world. There is mobility. At the same time, on the local level, there are more political tensions, and I've witnessed a lot more suppression on the local level, and we need an active public sphere. So at the same time as public spheres are becoming digital, and you can connect with activists across the world, the public sphere locally is eroding, and we have to think of what is going on with the public sphere outside the echo chambers that are formed by, you know, communities of people that think alike. How do we not splinter and think together and disagree, have a dissensus, not thinking of the political other as a morally deficient, less human than you, but be able to come into conversation and disagree. And that is becoming increasingly impossible. And I think that's also a function of this kind of global connection of people along interest lines, along beliefs, but splitting up and not having a public sphere where different things, different views confront each other. And for me, that's why platforms are very important, the kind of platforms that bring people from different parts of the political spectrum. And they're fewer and fewer, and they're around the art world. They're we don't need to read the same newspapers anymore, but we go to the same museums. So these platforms are becoming increasingly important to the public sphere, to the meeting of opinions that don't necessarily agree with each other.
Thank you. We have time for just one last question. Anyone? Please.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this discussion. My name is Katti Hofflin. I come from the region Västra Götaland here in this country. I'm wondering about the rights that we take so much for granted in the Nordic countries. From my experience, I've been worrying for this for some time. And you who now maybe in the States or in your other experiences see these rights erode, what would you say to us, naive, stupid people who take our rights for granted and think that we have democracy, it's always going to be like this? You know, the other crazy parties are just, you know, clowns. So what should we be doing now differently to safeguard artistic freedom and freedom of speech?
We'll take Marianne's question and then we'll come back to our panelists.
Thank you. I'm just looking at these 4 extremely different experiences, and I can see the common denominator. It's really about people exercising their right to express themselves through the culture that they've chosen. And I'm also thinking, as Chris was speaking about the fragmentation, and I'd like to ask, I think it's kind of a challenging question, but if we look at the word solidarity, and we look at the fact that we're here to mutually support one another's struggles, how would the 4 of you imagine supporting one another?
So I'll give each of you 30 seconds to respond to one or both of the questions, and we'll start winding down. Please.
I could just shortly.
Please.
Lock us into a room for 1 hour. We have to learn to know each other first, and I'm sure we come with a solution to your question. Thank you.
Please, Dr. Sarmast.
I also would like use the same word, solidarity, and also what you can do to help freedom of expression and cultural and artistic rights of people, which is, as you pointed out correctly, that you have it for granted, but people are risking their life to have one of those elements of artistic rights, like rights to have access to music education. So solidarity of people in this room between themselves, but for the countries like Afghanistan is significantly important. You can be the voices of the voiceless people of Afghanistan today. You can be the voices of the Afghan musicians, Afghan children, Afghan women. So solidarity, I'm amplifying the voices of those people who are repressed under the name of religion is significantly important, and we expect from all of you that at least after today's conversation we can hear your voices, at least to your own platforms. If we cannot come with a joint statement in condemning the Taliban, the policies of the Taliban's against artistic and cultural and musical rights of the Afghan people as a community, but at least maybe each institution can be a voice of the voiceless Afghan people.
Any last thoughts on opportunities for collaboration? Please, Daphne.
Sí. Quisiera agregar quizás algo que no
something that has not been mentioned, but if there is a common aspect that could affect the creative, artistic freedom, at least in Latin America, where I come from, is how precarious the life of artists and activists is. So if there is a concrete action that could be taken, that would be the funding, especially from the colonial states who participated in the process of taking away the richness from that region for the artists and the activists who are, so that we can make our voices heard in Latin America. Thank you.
Well, I think we all need to listen, especially in the West. But we'll need to listen and listen with humility. And when we think that we have freedoms and we're taking them for granted, maybe kind of look inside, and maybe there are more challenges to those artistic freedoms than seems on the surface, because there are always subtle pressures that institutions respond to, and that artists are affected and the public sphere is affected. But I think one thing we really, we're shaping the world of the digital now, artificial intelligence. This is really going to change our world. And I think to help each other and to help society as a whole, we should be focusing more on that and see how we can shape it in a way that it opens up more avenues for circulation of artistic expression, rather than become more of a technology of surveillance and repression. So we have common goals here that we need to be working towards.
Thank you. We're running out of time, so we'll begin to wrap this session down. This panel has touched upon a whole range of issues related to barriers and threats, whether it is about access to cultural rights for all, going hyper-digital, cancel culture, censorship. It's a whole range of issues. And this afternoon, we'll have the opportunity to really talk in depth about all of them. And all of you can join the conversation at our World Cafe session. So we're hoping we can use the inspiration from this session as food for thought for continuing conversations on these and other topics this afternoon. Thank you very much to our panel, and thank you everyone for joining this conversation and raising some critical issues. And now it's time for housekeeping and then on to lunch. Thank you everyone.